Welcome to Lecture 2 of the Holy Apostles College and Seminary, MOOC, Peace and Development in Catholic Social Teaching. My name is Dr. Cynthia Tulin, and in this lesson I will be covering Paul VI encyclical on the development of peoples, which came out in 1967. I strongly suggest that you read the entire document. Notice that the slides, as you view them, are edited quotations from Paul VI. This is not material that is original to me. I edit the quotations so that they're more easily understandable by students. Note also that I use the word man in the generic sense to mean all humans. At the end of the lesson, you will find that there is a true or false quiz that you can take to judge how much you gained from this particular lesson. I want to begin with this quotation from the beginning of the encyclical because it pretty much tells us what we're going to look at. The progressive development of peoples is an object of deep interest and concern to the Church. This is particularly true in the case of those peoples who are trying to escape the ravages of hunger, poverty, endemic disease, and ignorance, of those who are seeking a larger share in the benefits of civilization and a more active improvement of their human qualities, of those who are consciously striving for fuller growth. Development is a problem that all of us have to address. It is very important for people to realize the social question touches everyone on the planet. Less fortunate nations, for instance those whose people are hungry, ask for help from those nations with plenty. The Church asks us to respond to this plea. In the first section, which he entitles Man's Complete Development, men today try to eliminate the problems we all face, as well as issues that insult human dignity. Although men strive for improvement, many continue to live in terrible conditions. Nations that have gained political independence realize they must be concerned with good infrastructure and processes. Then their citizens can find fulfillment as men, and their country will be properly situated among the nations. Some colonizing nations were only concerned with their own interests. When they left a host nation, the local economy was not in a good position to survive or thrive, for instance, those with a one-crop economy. Other colonizing nations brought benefits to the host nations. Although they did not leave a perfected, fully developed structure, they did improve living conditions, for instance, communication and education. Even so, those structures are not adequate to compete in the world market today. Unless things are improved, the inequalities between rich and poor nations will continue to increase, and at a faster rate. The disparity grows larger all the time. Social unrest is spreading throughout the world, especially among the poor in industrializing countries. It is even spreading to farmers. In some places, a privileged minority enjoys enormous possessions and power, while the rest of the population is impoverished. These latter live in dire circumstances. Traditional and industrialized cultures are in conflict, which leads to generational conflict. Older generations prefer old social structures, and the younger prefer new forms of social life. Traditional ways are facing extinction. Some people are tempted by political, economic, and social ideologies that promise improvements. These ideologies can become totalitarian. The Church teaches faith in Christ and helps improve human progress of the nations. For example, building schools, hospitals, and churches. Attempts were not always perfect. Some missionaries combined gospel teaching with thoughts of the native land, yet they did contribute to the protection of the traditional cultures as well as overall progress. Now the efforts of individuals and groups is inadequate. Everyone has to examine all aspects of the problem, social, economic, cultural, and spiritual, and work together. The Church says the power of the Church and state are distinct and supreme in its area of competency. Yet because the Church lives among men, she offers her distinctive contribution, a global perspective on man and human realities. For development to be authentic, it has to foster the development of each man and of the whole man. It cannot be limited to economic growth. God wants every man to find fulfillment by doing what he is supposed to do in his life. Each has innate capacities he can develop through life, for example, through education, that contribute to fulfilling the goal God gave him. Each man has intellect and free will, and is responsible for his self-fulfillment. Teachers and others may help or hinder him, but he is the chief architect of his own success or failure. Utilizing only his talent and willpower, each man can grow in humanity, enhance his personal worth, and perfect himself. All of creation is directed to God. Man should direct his life to God of his own accord. The end of self-fulfillment is a new life. United with the life-giving Christ, man's life is newly enhanced. It acquires a transcendent humanism which surpasses its nature and bestows new fullness of life. All men are social. They belong to the human community and must work to develop human society. This is an important paragraph. We are the heirs of earlier generations, and we reap benefits from the efforts of our contemporaries. We are under obligation to all men. Therefore, we cannot disregard the welfare of those who will come after us to increase the human family. The reality of human solidarity brings us not only benefits, but also obligations. To achieve individual and group fulfillment, we must maintain the proper scale of values. We must pursue life's necessities through work. In that process, we must not succumb to greed and the desire for power. Rich and poor alike, be they individuals, families, or nations, can fall prey to avarice and soul-stifling materialism. Neither individuals nor nations should regard the possession of more and more goods as the ultimate objective. Man needs goods to grow as a human, but he can be enslaved by them if he sees them as the supreme good. The exclusive pursuit of material possessions prevents man's growth and stands in opposition to his true grandeur. Avarice, in individuals and in nations, is the most obvious form of stultified moral development. Development calls for an ever-growing number of technical experts, but more importantly, wise men in search of a new humanism, which will enable our contemporaries to enjoy the higher values of love and friendship, of prayer and contemplation, and thus find themselves. This is what will guarantee man's authentic development, his transition from less than human conditions to truly human ones. Less than human conditions include material poverty, where people lack the bare necessities, moral poverty, where they are crushed by self-love and oppressive political structures. Truly human conditions include the rise from poverty, the elimination of social ills, and increasing knowledge and culture. Creation is made for man, and according to Genesis, man is supposed to give it meaning by his intelligent activity, to complete and perfect it by his own efforts and to his own advantage. If this is true, every man should be able to take what he needs from the earth. As an aside, we often call this the universal destination of goods. All other rights, even the rights of property and free trade, are lower than this one. They should assist in its implementation and never hinder it. The right to private property is not absolute and unconditional. No one may appropriate surplus goods solely for his own private use when others lack the bare necessities of life. Large landed estates which are unused, poorly used, or have a negative impact on general prosperity or interests of the country can sometimes be seized for the common good. Income is not for capricious use or only for personal gain. If some citizens have accumulated a large income from their own nation, they cannot put a large amount in foreign countries for their own private gain. They must take into account their country's interests. The introduction of industrialization is necessary for economic growth and human progress, and is both a sign of development and a spur to it. Man learns the laws of nature and how to make use of natural resources. This leads him to take prudent risks and start new ventures. Some ideas present profit as the chief spur to economic progress, free competition as the guiding norm of economics, and private ownership of the means of production as an absolute right, having no limits nor concomitant social obligations. Unbridled liberalism leads to international imperialism of money. These manipulations of economic forces are condemned. Economics is supposed to be in the service of man. This type of capitalism resulted in negative impacts, but these are not due to the rise of industrialization. The problem is the economic concepts that grew at that time. Work is willed and approved by God. He gave man the things he needed to finish and perfect his work. In working, man leaves his imprint on what he is working on and develops persistence, inventiveness, and concentration. If he works with others, work unites men into brothers. Work results in money, pleasure, and power, and sometimes selfishness and revolt. It also results in professionalism, a sense of duty, and love of neighbor. But it can threaten man's dignity and enslave him. As Christians, we know work is aimed at establishing the supernatural here on earth. Due to world conditions, we must make haste in the work of development, but not work too quickly. For instance, agrarian reforms and industrialization can fail and produce social evils if not thought out properly. This is the situation. The injustice of certain situations cries out for God's attention. Lacking the bare necessities of life, whole nations are under the thumb of others. They cannot act on their own initiative. They cannot exercise personal responsibility. They cannot work towards a higher degree of cultural refinement or a greater participation in social and public life. They are sorely tempted to redress these insults to their human nature by violent means. But remember that revolutions usually result in another evil situation, or even a worse one. Clearly, the current situation needs to be addressed and appropriate changes made, and quickly. Everyone must be ready to do what they can based on education, office, or authority. To succeed, we need organized programs for directing, stimulating, coordinating, supplying, and integrating the work of individuals and groups. Authorities must establish goals and plans and methods to fulfill them. They should stimulate the efforts of those involved and ensure that private initiative and intermediary organizations are involved. This will allow them to avoid collectivization and a planned economy. Development should mean social progress and economic growth. Increasing wealth and its distribution and developing technology are not enough. Economic growth needs social progress. Basic education is the first objective for any nation trying to develop. Lack of education is as serious as lack of food. The illiterate is a starved spirit. When someone learns how to read and write, he is equipped to do a job and to shoulder a profession, to develop self-confidence and realize that he can progress along with others. Those who work for this are the primary agents of development because they enable man to act for himself. The family is extremely important. The family, stable and monogamous, with different generations living together, is the basis of society. Members acquire wisdom together and harmonize personal rights and social needs. The rate of population growth adds to development problems. The population, for instance, grows more quickly than available resources. Public authorities can be involved in these issues, but solutions must be in line with the moral law. The inalienable rights of marriage and procreation must be protected. Parents should decide how many children they will have, considering their lives, children already born, their community, and in accord with God's law, with properly formed conscience. Professional organizations help man in education and training, in bringing an awareness of the common good to members. Professional organizations and trade unions are permissible, but man should stay away from philosophies based on materialism and atheism. Cultural institutions aid in development. Every country has a cultural tradition with institutions concerning the everyday world and the life of the spirit. For example, art, religion. If those dealing with the spirit embody truly human values, they should not be sacrificed for the life of the everyday world. Any group of people who would consent to let this happen would be giving up the better portion of their heritage. In order to live, they would be giving up their reason for living. Poorer nations should be careful not to be tempted by the lifestyle of wealthier nations. Their example is to work and be diligent for temporal prosperity alone. They should reject what would truly harm a human way of life and accept what is compatible with their heritage. The ultimate goal of development is the fulfillment of the whole man and of every man. True humanism points the way toward God and acknowledges the task to which we are called, the task which offers us the real meaning of human life. The second portion, the common development of mankind. And here we have a quotation, a lengthy quotation. Development of the individual necessarily entails a joint effort for the development of the human race as a whole. We also urge men to explore concrete and practicable ways of organizing and coordinating their efforts so that available resources might be shared with others. In this way, genuine bonds between nations might be forged. There are three major duties. Wealthier nations have these three obligations. A mutual solidarity, which is to aid developing nations. Social justice, rectification of trade relations between strong and weak nations. And universal charity, the effort to build a more humane world community. The matter is urgent, for on it depends the future of world civilization. We are all aware that countless people are hungry and undernourished. children die or have physical or mental handicaps. There have been appeals for help and some progress has been made. But efforts to this point are inadequate. We should alleviate hunger and poverty, but we also need to build a community where men live free and truly human lives with no discrimination or servitude. The rich must be generous and willing to sacrifice and exert great effort. For instance, we should pay higher prices so others can earn just wages in another country. Nations must promote human solidarity. They must produce more and better goods and products so that all its citizens may truly live human lives and so that it may contribute to the common development of the human race. Wealthy nations should set aside some goods to help others and train people so they can contribute knowledge and skill to poor countries. Superfluous goods of wealthier nations ought to be placed at the disposal of poorer nations. The word neighbor now means everyone in the world, not just someone physically near to us. Wealthy nations will feel God's judgment and the poor's wrath if they do not do this. To be successful, we need coordinated planning of projects and programs. These are much more effective than occasional efforts promoted by individual goodwill. Programs promote economic and social progress, give meaning to work, develop order in life, and enhance dignity. At the Eucharistic Congress in Bombay, Paul VI asked leaders to put a portion of their military expenditures into a world fund to help the poor. Such a fund would stop rivalries, promote dialogue, and reduce fear and mistrust among nations, for example, fear of a new form of colonialism. Here is a powerful appeal, again from Paul VI. Is it not plain to everyone that such a fund would reduce the need for those other expenditures that are motivated by fear and stubborn pride? Countless millions are starving. Countless families are destitute. Countless men are steeped in ignorance. Countless people need schools, hospitals, and homes worthy of the name. In such circumstances, we cannot tolerate public and private expenditures of a wasteful nature. We cannot but condemn lavish displays of wealth by nations or individuals. We cannot approve of a debilitating arms race. It is our solemn duty to speak out against them. If only world leaders would listen to us before it is too late. Dialogue between wealthy and poor nations could include what funds are needed, how they would be used, the use of the funds, and repayment terms. The poor nations would not fear interference in their internal affairs or disruption of their social order. Paul VI said, as sovereign nations, they are entitled to manage their own affairs, to fashion their own policies, and to choose their own form of government. In other words, what is needed is mutual cooperation among nations, freely undertaken, where each enjoys equal dignity and can help to shape a world community truly worthy of man. This task seems impossible for many places on earth. Success requires a concerted, continuing, and courageous effort. It is an urgent task. The very life of needy nations, civil peace in the developing countries, and world peace itself are at stake. Although there are efforts to help poorer nations, both financially and technologically, a crucial area is unstable trade relations between wealthy and poor nations. On average, highly industrialized nations export their manufactured products. Less developed nations sell raw materials and agricultural crops. The price of manufactured products rises rapidly and finds a ready market. Crops and raw materials are subject to sudden and wide-ranging shifts in market price. They do not share in the growing market value of industrialized products. Developing nations largely depend on exports for a balanced economy. If two equal parties are engaged in free trade, it works. When the parties are unequal, freely agreed upon market prices can be unfair. Trade relations cannot be based solely on the principle of free competition. Free trade can be called just only when it conforms to the demands of social justice. Highly developed nations know this and take measures to balance their economies. This should apply to wealthy and poor nations. Competition should continue, but within limits so that it is just. A level of equality of opportunity should be developed. Start with a certain amount of equality in discussions and price talks, for example. International agreements on a broad scale could establish general norms to regulate prices, promote production facilities, and favor infant industries. Nationalism and racism are obstacles to development. National pride is acceptable, but should contribute to the welfare of all nations. Racism can hide behind rivalries of clans and political parties. Again this is Paul VI, hope distrust and selfishness among nations will eventually be overcome by a stronger desire for mutual collaboration and a heightened sense of solidarity. Developing nations should organize and pool their efforts for the development of a given region. For example, joint programs or coordinate investment funds wisely. Multilateral and broad international associations might undertake the necessary work of organization to find ways to help needy nations. We should work towards a more effective world solidarity, where all peoples could be artisans of their own destiny. International relationships would be characterized by respect and friendship. Mutual cooperation will be the hallmark of collaborative efforts, and all nations would consider concerted effort for the betterment of all a duty. Developing nations are asking that they be allowed to take part in the construction of a better world, one which would provide better protection for every man's rights and duties. Human society is sorely ill. The cause is not so much the depletion of natural resources, nor their monopolistic control by a privileged few. It is rather the weakening of brotherly ties between individuals and nations. Foreigners should always be welcomed, especially the young and immigrant workers. This is a duty based on solidarity and charity. The young can be lonely or distressed, or corrupted by their new environment, or tempted to violence due to their circumstances. Some receive a good education in a host nation and could be a great resource in their nation, but lose respect for their home. Immigrant workers often live in inhuman conditions, denying themselves so that they can send money to their native land. Some business people travel to poorer nations and they have a social sense in their own land, but when in developing countries they have baser motives. They should work for social progress in these lands, develop skilled workers, foster people's initiative. Meanwhile, relationships between superiors and subordinates must be governed by justice and contracts should be given, for example, that govern employment relations, the duties involved. No one, whatever his status may be, should be unjustly subjected to the arbitrary whim of another. An increasing number of experts are going on development missions, sent by a variety of groups and associations. They are in these countries to help. The people quickly know whether an expert has good intention or not. If not, the message will be rejected. Experts have to show expertise and love. Being an expert doesn't make them superior. It cannot have a tinge of nationalism or racial discrimination. They must remember they are guests in a foreign land and act accordingly. Dialogue between cultures can pave the way for a new relationship of brotherhood between nations. Everyone involved must be motivated by love and the desire to build one global civilization. Paul VI said, "This dialogue will be fruitful if it shows the participants how to make economic progress and how to achieve spiritual growth as well. If the technicians take the role of teachers and educators, if the training provided is characterized by a concern for spiritual and moral values, so that it ensures human betterment as well as economic growth, then the bonds of solidarity will endure, even when the aid programs are past and gone. Is it not plain to all that closer ties of this sort will contribute immeasurably to the preservation of world peace?" Many young people are participating in missionary work or public and private organizations that try to aid developing countries. No one is permitted to disregard the plight of his brothers living in dire poverty, enmeshed in ignorance and tormented by insecurity. Everyone should pray that the human race will work to eradicate these evils, and that every individual will commit to working for development as suits his skills and talents. It is the person who is motivated by genuine love more than anyone else who pits his intelligence against the problems of poverty, trying to uncover the causes and looking for effective ways of combating and overcoming them. When there are extreme differences between developed and developing nations, peace is in jeopardy. And here is his very famous saying, "For peace is not simply the absence of warfare, based on a precarious balance of power. It is fashioned by efforts directed day after day toward the establishment of the ordered universe willed by God, with a more perfect form of justice among men. Nations are the architects of their own development and must bear that burden. They need help to do that. International collaboration among the nations of the world calls for institutions that will promote, coordinate, and direct it until a new juridical order is firmly established and fully ratified. This work has already started, as men are trying to establish closer bonds of brotherhood all over the world. The work is often inadequate or goes in reverse, but progress is made. This struggle toward a more human way of life certainly calls for hard work and imposes difficult sacrifices. But even adversity, when endured for the sake of one's brothers and out of love for them, can contribute greatly to human progress. This is a serious, multidimensional issue, and action must be taken. The moment for action has reached a critical juncture. Can countless innocent children be saved? Can countless destitute families obtain more human living conditions? Can world peace and human civilization be preserved intact? Every individual and every nation must face up to this issue, for it is their problem.